What if I told you that one of the most iconic figures in music history was dying on stage in front of thousands of screaming fans, and nobody even noticed? August 1, 1976, Elvis Presley shuffles through a 2:30 p.m. matinee in Virginia, bloated, exhausted, and strung out on pills, delivering a performance so lethargic that a reporter in the crowd wondered if the legend had already died. But here's the thing that haunts me: the crowd didn't care. They still threw their scarves into the air like it was 1956. Why? Because by this point, Elvis wasn't a musician anymore. He was a myth, a nostalgia factory, a human reliquary for people clutching at the edges of a past they never even lived. And honestly, that's way more fascinating than another, saddened by addiction, obituary. Let me explain why this show wasn't just a failure. It was a cultural autopsy in real time. Look, we all know the tabloid version of Elvis's downfall: drugs, Colonel Parker's greed, the divorce, the weight gain. But what Cheryl Tucker's review accidentally exposes is something darker. She complains about missing Heartbreak Hotel and Love Me Tender, songs from a guy who'd been creatively dead for a decade. That audience wasn't there for music. They were paying $12.50, which was a lot back then, to touch a god who'd stopped believing in himself. In my opinion, that's why Elvis phoned it in. He knew the game better than anyone. When you become a brand, the performance stops being about art and starts being about survival. Let's unpack that bizarre hurt moment. The one time he actually feels something, right? I'm hurt, much more than you ever know, and suddenly there's a flicker of the old fire. But here's the twist: that song wasn't even his. Johnny Cash made it iconic years later. Yet in 1976, Elvis singing it becomes this weird meta-tragedy. He's channeling someone else's pain to feel alive, while the crowd eats it up because, honestly, they didn't want the real Elvis. They wanted the idea of Elvis. The leather-clad rebel, the hip-shaking provocateur. That guy hadn't existed since Ike Eisenhower was president. And let's talk about that 2:30 p.m. show. Who schedules a rock concert before dinner? Colonel Parker, that's who, and here's where the conspiracy theories get juicy. The man who controlled Elvis literally structured tours to burn him out, financially shackling him to a schedule that made rehab impossible. But what many people don't realize is that this wasn't malice, it was math. Elvis's income stream relied on constant touring because his merch deals, album sales, and Vegas residencies were all tied to physical appearances. He wasn't an artist, he was a cash flow asset. From my perspective, that's why the 1972 Hampton footage might make a better movie than the Luhrmann biopic. Because watching a broken man mechanically toss scarves into a crowd while his voice still miraculously works, that's Shakespearean. The little girl shouting, "Almost touched him," that's the whole damn point. Generations since have chased that same high: Taylor Swift fans crying at Eras Tour, Bieber stans reliving 2010. We don't want the real person, we want the hologram in our heads. Elvis knew this. In his final years, he weaponized nostalgia, turning concerts into participatory museums where fans could experience a version of him that hadn't existed since the 60s. The tragedy isn't that he couldn't sing Hound Dog with energy in 76. The tragedy is that we still pretend he peaked then. No. The real peak was when he stopped fighting the machine and became the machine. That's the story we should be telling. So here's my closing thought: when Baz Luhrmann inevitably edits that 1972 footage into another cinematic fever dream, will we finally confront the fact that Elvis's greatest performance was playing Elvis? Because the man who invented rock and roll spent his final decade doing something way more radical. He became the first pop star to monetize his own ghost. And in an era where legacy artists tour into their 80s and holograms headline Coachella, isn't that the most prophetic act of all? What do you think? Drop your take below. Was Elvis a victim, a visionary, or just the first casualty of forever being the brand?